We've looked at arrays as a method of storing like data together in a unit and be able to access it by the indices of each data item. And it seems like every beginning programming textbook and beginning programming course starts with arrays as a way of learning about data structures. But arrays in reality aren't used as much as other data structures, particularly in some languages like C#, that use things called generics. Now we've also seen in C# we have an array list. An array list has a huge advantage over an array in that it can shrink and expand as needed as items are added to it or removed from it. It doesn't have the limitation of specifying a size of the array and then going outside of the bounds of that array if we try to add to it without resizing it. But most C# programmers use generics, and generics are a robust type-safe data structure that are a form of polymorphism, and the data type is specified inside of angle brackets. And the data type can be anything. It can be the built-in data types of C#, such as string, int, double, but the data types can also be the custom classes we create or a struct data type. The most common of these is list, and I find myself using list much more now than I use arrays to do the same thing I would use for an array, especially when I don't know how many elements there are. Now if I have a simple thing like I need an array of the days of the week, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, so forth, and there's going to be 7 units in that data structure, then an array is an easy choice for me. But if I'm reading in data from a file or from a database, and I don't know how many units there are, those number of units will change over time, then a list is a much better option. There are several other types of generics, and we're going to focus on 3 others in this video. The dictionary allows us to do pairs of items of a key and a value, much like we look up a term in a dictionary and find the definition. So dictionaries are great for when we have pairs. And the nice thing about dictionaries is I can't have a key that is duplicative. If I try to add a second key that's already in the dictionary, it won't allow me to do that. Queues are a way of providing a list of items in which I want to pull items out, and same with stack. And the difference between the two is a queue takes the first item in as the first item out, but a stack takes the last item in as the first item out. And we'll look at that in a minute. So in declaring a list, we specify the data type inside the angle brackets. The name of our list, in this case is going to be software, equals a new list, same data type, and then our constructor method with the pair of parentheses. And we can use the add method to add items into that list. As I mentioned, as we add items in, the list expands. And so we can add items in just by specifying, in this case, a string value inside the parentheses. And I can pull items out based on the index number. So I can also alphabetize the list or order the list in some way. I can get the count of the list, so if I need to iterate through a loop, I can find how many items there are. And then I can also insert into that list using the insert method, and specifying, in this case, the first parameter being the index number and the item I want to put in. So in this case, if I did the insert to Microsoft Excel would become index 2 and Microsoft Word would become index 3. I can remove an item at a particular index by specifying the index number using remove at. We can remove an item just based on the text of the item. So I can remove Visual Studio. And then I can also clear the entire list using the clear command. We can iterate through the list using a for each loop. So in this case, I might use a variable that's, since my list is a string, I would say string XYZ in my list software, and I can then reference each item in that list as XYZ and do something with it. A dictionary is declared in much the same way, but we're specifying 2 data types. And here I have 2 strings, and we're going to keep track of the club officers of a campus club equals new dictionary, and again the 2 strings, and calling our constructor. And then we can use the add method once again, specifying the 2 string values. So we're going to set Ann as the president, Bobby as the vice president, and Cheryl as the secretary. On this 4th line, I'm specifying a different way of adding items, and that is I can use the key as an index and specify a value. So here I'm adding an index of treasurer. and specifying the value as Darren. I can pull items out of that dictionary if I know the key. So club officers, the key here instead of an index number is the word president, and assigning it to a string of pres, and the value of pres in this case would be Ann. I can also get how many items there are in that dictionary using the .count property. And I can change values by specifying the key. So in this case, club officers, and the key is vice president. I'm going to reset the vice president from Bobby to Bill. We can remove an item by specifying the key value. So this is club officers.remove secretary. I can clear all the items in the dictionary. And I can also check to see if the dictionary contains a particular key. So with the method of contains key, it returns a Boolean value of either true or false. If I try to add a new pair using the add method where the key already exists, such as in this case a second secretary with Cindy, it's going to generate an exception. So if I wanted to change Cindy to secretary, I'd want to use this method up here of specifying the key of secretary equals Cindy. And again, we can iterate through this list. We're going to use var xyz in our dictionary, and we can pull the values by .key and .value properties and then do something with those. A queue is another type of generic, and it's a first in, first out list, specifying the data type inside angle brackets for queue. I'm going to name this one steps equals new queue string as our data type, and the parentheses to call the constructor. And this creates an empty queue, and then we can add items to that queue by using enqueue rather than add. So we add items to the queue structure with enqueue, specifying in the parentheses the item we want to add. So here I'm adding a string of set parking brake, loosen lug nuts, jack up car, and remove lug nuts and tire, and that creates a list here of those items with the first in here at the top being set parking brake, and that becomes the first item out. So to get an item out, we can use the dequeue method. So here step 1 equals steps.dequeue, and step 1 would equal set parking brake. That removes the item from the list, and now everything would move up. And so the loosen lug nuts becomes the next item out if I dequeue. I can get the number of items in the queue by using the .count property again. And I can also check to see if there are still values here in the queue with the peek method. And we've used peek, of course, when we've read data in from a text file. Well, the peek method also applies here to the queue, and it will throw an error if there are no more steps. And then I can also convert a queue to an array using the .toArray method. A stack is very similar to a queue, except it is a LIFO structure, last in, first out, instead of a FIFO, first in, first out. And we declare the stack the same way we declared the queue, specifying the data type inside angle brackets, giving its name, and then calling the constructor for that data type. Rather than using enqueue to add items to the stack, we use the push command. So the name of my stack, .push, and the item I want to push on. So in this case, I did Alan, Barbara, Cody, Donna. You'll see a difference here in the representation from the queue in that these have the most recent item added at the top. So these are in reverse order. And stacks are often discussed as an analogy with cafeteria trays, where there's a spring-loaded mechanism of cafeteria trays, and the last cafeteria tray added to the stack is the first one taken off the stack. To get the item out of the stack, we use the pop command. And here I have a variable called newest of string data type equals newest members.pop, and so newest would equal Donna. And when I use the pop command, then Donna is removed from the stack, and everything else moves up. Again, think of that spring as pushing things up. And so the next pop would be Cody, and the pop after that would be Barbara, assuming no more items have been added into the stack. We can use the count property to find how many items are in the stack, as well as using the peek method to see if there are still items left in that stack or what the next item would be. And then we can also convert the members of the stack to an array. We can iterate through the stack just like we did with the queue, and doing something with the value, in this case x, y, z, inside of that loop. So I was trying to come up with a good project that uses one or more of the generics and focused on the dictionary. And so I thought, well, why not create a study card program that would allow a student to basically create a stack of index cards with an item written on one side and a corresponding item on the other side. So like the old flashcards. Originally I called this flashcards, and I've changed the name to study cards, so I probably need to change this open a flashcard file to say open a study card, and change this button to say open study card file. I'm going to go ahead and open the file, and so I've created several files, one for US government terms, one for Spanish English, and one for multiplication problems. And you can think of all kinds of classes you could use this for. I'm going to open the Spanish English, and you'll notice that I'm using a UTF-8 encoded text file that's tab delimited. And this was a little bit of a challenge and created part of the scope creep I'll talk about in this project. Now, scope creep is where you have a project defined, but you keep adding to it, or a client keeps adding to it and adding in more features or changing things. And that's called scope creep. You have to be aware of scope creep, especially working with a client. And in a contract with a client, you probably want to spell something out in terms of if they change some of the parameters or add things in, add new features in. Those are going to be more costly, because sometimes adding those new items in will force you to change things you've already done. And I experienced some of that as I did this project. This project sort of took a little bit of a life of its own, but one of the problems was the UTF-8. And I created my data file inside Excel and did a tab delimited file. The problem is it was ANSI coded and not UTF-8 coded. And so I lost things like the characters that had some accents over them, or the tilde character. So I ended up creating a way of being able to create the new data files, or editing the data files inside my program. I can still use Excel, and I can still bring in comma separated values into this program that are UTF-8. But if you have commas inside either the key or the value, then that creates problems. So anyway, I'm going to open up this Spanish English. And so here I have 101 cards. I see the topic, the Spanish English vocabulary. I can start my going through these cards with either side A or side B. Side A is Spanish, side B is English. So if I want to study from English to Spanish, I could change this and flip the card, and then every new card would come up with this blue side B as the English version. I'm going to go back to side A and flip it back. So you see here the flip button allows me to go back and forth between the two sides, so I can use it to self-test. And if I get it correct, I mark it as correct, and it then brings up the next item. So if I know abuela is grandmother, or if I don't know that, I can flip it and find out. And then I can mark it as correct. Abuelo, of course, would be grandfather, and so forth. So I would go through this. Maybe I don't know what that one is. Mark it as incorrect. Maybe I don't know what that one is. Oh, so here's where I ran into the problems with the little accent over the I on a key. And what I would get is a little question mark there instead because of the ANSI encoding. So that's where the UTF came in, and I had to change how that data file was encoded. So again, as I mark some of these as correct or incorrect, over here I'm getting a score of my correct and my incorrect. And I can go through all 101 of these, and then I don't need to review the correct ones. What I want to do is just review the incorrect ones. Now you'll notice the other thing here, and that is these were coming in as alphabetized because that's how I set them up in my data file. If I wanted to shuffle these randomly, I have a button to do that. And I can also go back through the entire stack again using the clear and restart button. I'll come back and shuffle here in a minute. But let me review the incorrect for a minute, because there's 4 that I marked incorrect. So if I review just those 4, I can shuffle those if I want. I'm going to go ahead and say yes. And now I'm going through just those 4 cards. So I'm going to get 1 of 4, and I can mark that one. I know that's water. He. I can mark again one as incorrect. I'll mark this one as incorrect as well. Now I've gone through the cards, and if I want, I can review just those two, and again, I'm going to go ahead and shuffle them, and now I'm looking at 1 and 2 cards. So I can keep going through those incorrect cards as I need to. I have restarted my program and brought in the Spanish list again. And so, as I mentioned, these are alphabetized in the order, and if I don't want that alphabetical order, I can choose random shuffle. And now they're going to be randomized in terms of the order. And once again, I can flip and mark an item as correct. And so these are going to come in various orders. I don't know what camisa is. I can mark that as incorrect. I'll probably want to look at what the item is, mark that incorrect, and I can go through my list in a random order. I can also clear and restart, and that will just simply restart from the very beginning, in this case with the random order, or if I didn't want that random order and go back to alphabetically, I could open the flashcard file again. Now I built an item here to create an edit. This is going to be the last phase of our project. I can edit my current data file, or I can load another data file in. So I have some other data files out here. This is going to erase all the items. So I have a multiplication table in which I have the problem and the solution. Or I can load another one in. So I have a U.S. government one, terms for maybe a civics class. And I can add items. I can create a new file. And I'm going to put my topic as cartoon dogs. I'll enter myself as the author. Side A is going to be the dog, and side B is going to be a description. And then I can add values. So I'm going to create a new value. And maybe my first dog is Astro. And this is going to be the Great Dane from the Jetsons. Add a new pair. I'll type in Odie. And this is going to be Garfield's dog roommate. And we'll add one more. So we'll do Snoopy, Charlie Brown's beagle from Peanuts. And then I'm going to save that file. I'm going to call this study cards, cartoon dogs, and this is going to be a UTF-8 tab file. And I'll click Save. I'm going to go back to the presenter, and I'm going to open up my cartoon dogs. And now I have 3 cards here. I have Astro, the Great Dane from the Jetsons. Maybe in this case I want to go from side B. I want to name the dog. What's Garfield's dog roommate? So that's of course going to be Odie. And then Charlie Brown's beagle from Peanuts, of course, is Snoopy. When I get through the end of the stack, it tells me I've gone through all the cards. If I try to review the incorrect, even though there's none there, I'm told there are no incorrect cards left to review. And I can review the incorrect cards as many times as I need to until I get them correct. So that's our project. The focus here is on using dictionaries, but also uses a couple lists, and it does use a stack in shuffling the items. I use a stack. So I would suggest as you prepare for the next video, go ahead and create the interface. And here are all the items for the interface. A bunch of labels. Of course, the card is a label in and of itself. I use an additional little label behind it, actually a label the same size behind it, that is just a little bit darker gray than my form, to give it that effect of a drop shadow. That is an unnamed label. It has no purpose other than aesthetics. And then I also have some radio buttons here if we're starting with side A or side B as we add in new cards. My buttons to flip mark correct and mark incorrect, and then the buttons to manage the stack as well as create and edit. We'll come back and create the other portion of this phase. We're going to do this in a couple videos. So to create and edit a new data file, we're going to add a panel and some additional items inside that panel. You don't need to worry about creating the panel at this point. What I'd like you to do in preparation for the next video is pause the video here and create your project of study cards with this interface.